Imagine a grand English manor shrouded in fog, where a wealthy lord lies dead in his locked library shot with his own gun, no signs of entry, and a single, tarnished brass button left behind in a hidden passage. Who could have slipped through the shadows to commit this perfect crime? Was it the devoted wife hiding family secrets, the daughter desperate for forbidden love, or the trusted doctor facing ruin? As suspicions swirl among a circle of suspects, each with alibis cracking under, Whodunit, an unassuming elderly sleuth, Miss Jane Marple, arrives with her knitting needles and razor-sharp mind. Using her little gray cells, she unravels lies, motives, and red herrings, leading to a shocking reveal where one tiny clue exposes the killer. But will justice prevail before another strike? Dive into this classic Agatha Christie-style mystery. Miss Marple solves a case with a single button clue, where every detail matters, and the truth hides in plain sight. Stay tuned. Who do you think did it? Chapter 1. The gathering at Elmwood Halley have always believed that the English countryside possesses a certain timeless charm, a quiet elegance that masks the undercurrents of human passion and intrigue. It was on a crisp autumn afternoon in late September that I, Captain Arthur Hastings, found myself motoring down the winding lanes toward Elmwood Hall, the stately home of Colonel Reginald Ashby. The invitation had come unexpectedly, born on the wings of an old wartime camaraderie. The Colonel and I had served together in the Boer War, sharing trenches and tales that forged bonds stronger than steel. Now, retired and somewhat adrift in the bustle of London, I welcomed the chance to escape to the serenity of rural life. As my little Austin chugged up the gravel drive, the hall came into view, a magnificent Georgian edifice of red brick and ivy, its tall chimneys piercing the azure sky like sentinels. The estate sprawled across acres of manicured lawns, bordered by ancient oaks that whispered secrets to the wind. I parked beside a gleaming Rolls-Royce and a more modest Morris, noting the presence of other guests. A butler, impeccably attired in tails, emerged from the grand oak doors. To greet me, Captain Hastings, sir, he intoned with a bow, his voice as polished as the silver he undoubtedly oversaw. Colonel Ashby is expecting you. I am Simmons, the butler. Allow me to take your valise. Thank you, Simmons, I replied, handing over my luggage and following him into the cavernous hall. The air was redolent with the scent of beeswax and fresh flowers, arranged in vases that dotted the marble-topped tables. Portraits of stern ancestors gazed down from the walls, their eyes seeming to follow my every step. The Colonel himself appeared moments later, striding from the drawing room with the brisk military bearing that had not deserted him in retirement. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a mustache that rivaled my own in its luxuriance, though his was streaked with gray. His face, weathered by years in India and Africa, broke into a hearty smile. Hastings, old chap, delighted you could make it. Come in, come in. The others are just assembling for tea. He clapped me on the back and led me into the drawing room, a spacious chamber furnished in the height of Edwardian taste plush armchairs, a roaring fire in the grate, and shelves lined with leather-bound volumes. A group of people turned as we entered, their conversations pausing like a recorded needle lifted from the groove. Allow me to introduce you. The Colonel boomed. My wife, Lady Eleanor. Lady Eleanor Ashby rose gracefully from her seat by the window, where she had been gazing out at the gardens. She was a woman of striking beauty, perhaps in her mid-40s, with raven hair swept into an elegant chignon and eyes of a piercing blue. Her gown, a soft silk in dove gray, whispered as she extended a gloved hand. Captain Hastings, how charming to meet you at last. Reginald has spoken so fondly of your shared adventures. The pleasure is mine, Lady Ashby, I said, bowing slightly. There was a coolness in her demeanor, a reserve that suggested depths not easily plumbed. I wondered idly if the Colonel's tales had included the more harrowing aspects of our campaigns. Next, the Colonel gestured to a young man lounging against the mantelpiece, a cigarette dangling from his lips. My son, Major Gerald Ashby, just back from Egypt, you know? Gerald straightened, offering a firm handshake. He was the image of his father in youth, tall, handsome, with a rakish air accentuated by a small scar on his cheek. Pleasure. Captain, father says you were quite the marksman in your day. I managed, I replied modestly, noting the faint tremor in his hand. Nerves from the front. Perhaps, or something more recent. Beside him stood a young woman, delicate as a porcelain doll, with golden curls and a shy smile. And my daughter, Miss Violet Ashby. Violet curtsied lightly. Welcome to Elmwood, Captain. I do hope you'll enjoy the shooting tomorrow. Father has arranged a small party. Her voice was soft, almost tentative, and her eyes darted briefly to her brother before returning to me. There was a fragility about her, as if she carried some unspoken burden. The introductions continued. Dr. Leonard Baxter, the family physician, was a portly gentleman with spectacles perched on a bulbous nose, and a manner that exuded professional reassurance. Always good to have another military man about, he said, pumping my hand. Keeps the conversation lively. Mrs. Clarissa Fenton, Lady Eleanor's sister, was a contrast to her sibling Plumper, with a florid complexion and a laugh that rang a touch too loudly. Oh, Captain, you must tell us all about London society. We rustics are starved for gossip. Finally, Mr. Victor Langford, a sharp-featured man in an impeccably tailored suit, nodded curtly. He was the Colonel's business associate, involved in some import-export venture from the colonies. His eyes, dark and calculating, seemed to appraise me like a ledger entry. Hastings, he said simply, his grip brief and cool. We settled into tea, served on fine china by the maid, Annie, a fresh-faced girl who moved with quiet efficiency. The conversation flowed politely. The weather, the prospects for the hunt, the latest news from Parliament. Yet beneath the surface, I sensed tensions simmering like a pot on a low flame. The Colonel dominated, regaling us with tales of his Indian campaigns, his voice booming with authority. Lady Eleanor smiled indulgently, but her fingers twisted a napkin in her lap, betraying a restlessness. Gerald smoked incessantly, his eyes flicking to the clock on the mantel. Violet toyed with her teacup, contributing little. Dr. Baxter interjected medical anecdotes, while Mrs. Fenton chattered about London fashions, her laughter punctuating the air like exclamation marks. Langford, however, remained aloof, his comments terse and businesslike. At one point, he and the Colonel exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, something about the shipment and delays in Cairo. Gerald overheard and snorted softly. Always business, even at tea, he muttered. As the afternoon waned, the group dispersed. The Colonel invited me for a stroll in the gardens, where the sun cast long shadows across the lawns. Glad you came. Hastings, he said, lighting a cigar. Things have been strained lately. Family matters. You know, I raised an eyebrow. Anything I can help with, old friend? He hesitated, puffing thoughtfully. Perhaps. Gerald's been in a spot of troubled debts from the tables in Cairo. And Violet, well, she's had her heart broken by some cad. Then there's Langford. Our partnership isn't as smooth as I'd hoped. Eleanor's sister is here to support her, but Clarissa has her own axes to grind. Even Baxter seems on edge, something about an old patient. He sighed, staring at the horizon. Elmwood should be a haven, but lately it feels like a powder keg. We walked in silence for a moment, the gravel crunching underfoot. The air was heavy with the scent of roses, their petals beginning to fall in the cooling breeze. Far off, a dog barked, and from the stables came the whinny of horses. Dinner that evening was a formal affair in the dining room, candlelight flickering on crystal and silver. Simmons presided with solemn dignity, while Annie and the cook, Mrs. Potts, a stout woman with a no-nonsense air, served courses of soup, fish, roast beef, and pudding. The wine flowed freely, loosening tongues. Lady Eleanor, seated at the foot of the table, steered the conversation with practiced ease. But I noticed her gaze lingering on Langford more than once. Was there a familiarity there? Oh, or was it my imagination? Gerald drank heavily, his laughter growing forced. Violet excused herself early, pleading a headache, her face pale, after the ladies withdrew. The men lingered over port and cigars. The colonel raised a toast to old times, and we reminisced about the war. Yet even here, cracks appeared. Langford pressed the colonel on financial matters, his tone insistent. "We can't afford more delays, Reginald. The investors are restless." The colonel waved him off. "Tomorrow, Victor. Business can wait." Dr. Baxter, mopping his brow, mentioned a recent spate of illnesses in the village. "Nothing serious, but one must be vigilant." As we retired, the hall clock struck 11, its chimes echoing through the silent house. My room was comfortable, with a four-poster bed and a view of the moonlit gardens. I undressed thoughtfully, replaying the day's interactions. There was an undercurrent at Elmwood Hall, a web of secrets and resentments that bound the inhabitants like invisible threads. Little did I know, as I drifted into sleep, that the tranquility would soon be shattered by an act of violence that would summon my old friend, Hercule Poirot, and unravel the tangled skeins of motive and deception. Chapter 2. The crimson-stained morning dawned bright and clear over Elmwood Hall, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows of my bedroom, casting golden patterns on the polished floorboards. I awoke refreshed, the tensions of the previous evening softened by a good night's sleep and the promise of a day in the countryside. The shooting party was to commence after breakfast, and I looked forward to the crisp air and the camaraderie of the field. Yet, as I dressed, a faint unease lingered, like a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Breakfast was served in the morning room, a cheerful space with chintz curtains and a long table laden with kedgeree, kippers, eggs, and racks of toast. The colonel presided jovially, his military anecdotes punctuated by the clink of cutlery. Lady Eleanor, elegant in a tweed skirt and silk blouse, poured tea with a serene smile, though her eyes seemed to search the room for something or someone. Gerald was absent, presumably sleeping off the previous night's port, while Violet nibbled delicately at a piece of toast, her expression wan. Dr. Baxter and Mrs. Fenton filled the conversational gaps, the former discussing a new influenza strain and the latter lamenting the lack of decent milliners in the nearby town of Ashford-Dartmoor. Langford, however, was notably subdued, his sharp features drawn as he scanned a copy of the Times. "Trouble in the markets," he muttered to Nell, one in particular, folding the paper with a snap. I caught the colonel's glance in his direction, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before he resumed his tale of a tiger hunt in Bengal. The meal concluded, and we were preparing to don our outdoor attire when a piercing scream rent the air, echoing from the direction of the library. The room froze, forks suspended, eyes wide. Simmons, the butler, appeared at the doorway, his normally impassive face ashen. "Sir Colonel Ashby, it's Mr. Langford, in the library." He's dead." The colonel leapt to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "Dead? Good God, man, what do you mean?" Without waiting for an answer, he strode toward the library, and I followed close behind, my heart pounding. The others trailed us. Lady Eleanor, her hand pressed to her mouth, Violet, clutching her mother's arm, Dr. Baxter, puffing slightly, and Mrs. Fenton, her usual volubility silenced. The library was a handsome room, its walls lined with oak, shelves groaning under the weight of countless volumes. A large mahogany desk stood before a bay window, its curtains half drawn to admit the morning light. And there, slumped across the desk, was Victor Langford, his head resting on a blotter stained with a spreading pool of crimson. A letter opener, its silver handle gleaming, protruded from his back just below the left shoulder blade. Blood had soaked his suit jacket, and his right hand clutched a pen, as if he had been writing when struck. Dr. Baxter pushed past me, his medical instincts overriding shock. He bent over the body, feeling for a pulse, though the stillness of Langford's form made the gesture futile. Dead, he confirmed, his voice low, stabbed, likely within the last hour. The wound is precise, straight to the heart. Lady Eleanor let out a stifled sob, and Violet buried her face in her mother's shoulder. The colonel, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, turned to Simmons. "Who found him?" "I did, sir," the butler replied, his voice unsteady. "I came to bring Mr. Langford his morning coffee, as he often worked early in the library. I saw him, like this, and ran to fetch you." "Did you touch anything?" I asked, my old instincts from the war kicking in. "No, sir." I saw the blood and knew better. The colonel paced, his hands clenched. "We must send for the police at once. And a doctor, though it seems Baxter's already here. Hastings, you've seen your share of trouble. What do you make of this?" I surveyed the scene, noting details as I had learned from my friend Hercule Poirot. The desk was tidy, save for the blood and a single sheet of paper beneath Langford's hand, bearing a few illegible scrawls. A small brass button, curiously out of place, lay on the floor near the desk's edge, its thread frayed as if torn from a garment. The window was closed, the room undisturbed except for a faint smell of tobacco. Langford's pipe, perhaps, though none was visible. "It's murder, no question," I said grimly. "The letter opener suggests a weapon of opportunity, but the precision of the blow indicates intent. Someone in this house knew exactly what they were doing." Mrs. Fenton gasped, fanning herself with a handkerchief. "In this house, surely." "You don't mean one of us. It's too early to say," I replied, though the closed nature of the setting a house full of guests, none of whom had left since last night, pointed to an uncomfortable truth. The colonel barked orders to Simmons to secure the room and telephone the police. As we waited, I couldn't shake the feeling that this crime required a keener mind than my own. I excused myself to the hall's telephone and placed a call to London, to the one man whose little gray cells could unravel this tangle, Hercule Poirot. He answered promptly, his voice as precise and accented as ever. "Mon ami Hastings, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" "Poirot, I'm at Elmwood Hall, Colonel Ashby's place. There's been a murder. Victor Langford, stabbed in the library. It's a devil of a mess, and I'd feel better with you here." A pause, then a soft chuckle. "A murder, you say? 'Tis interesting. I shall take the next train from Paddington. Expect me by luncheon. In the meantime, Hastings, touch nothing, observe everything, and keep that impulsive nature of yours in check." "We understood," I said, relieved. "Hurry, old chap." The police arrived within the hour. Local inspector named Hargreaves, a dour man with a notebook and a penchant for stating the obvious. He surveyed the scene, questioned Simmons, and declared the library off limits. Dr. Baxter estimated the time of death between 7 o'clock and 8 a.m., based on the body's temperature and the state of the blood. Hargreaves noted that Langford had been seen alive at 6:30 by Annie, the maid, who had glimpsed him entering the library as she swept the hall. The household gathered in the drawing room, a somber assembly. Gerald had appeared, bleary-eyed and shaken, claiming he'd been asleep until the commotion woke him. His absence at breakfast was noted, and Hargreaves scribbled furiously. Lady Eleanor sat rigidly, her composure fraying at the edges, while Violet stared blankly at the carpet. Mrs. Fenton wept noisily, and the colonel alternated between pacing and glowering at the inspector's questions. I slipped away to examine the hall, noting the layout. The library was accessible from the main corridor, with a side door leading to the terrace, which was locked. The button on the floor nagged at me a small detail, but Poirot had taught me that small details were often the key to great truths. I checked my watch. 11:15 a.m. Poirot's train would arrive soon. As I returned to the drawing room, I overheard Gerald muttering to Violet, "If only he hadn't pushed father so hard about that damned deal." Violet shushed him, her eyes darting nervously. I pretended not to hear, but the words lingered, adding another thread to the web of suspicion. The morning dragged on, the house heavy with grief and fear. Simmons served coffee, his hands trembling slightly, and Annie hovered near the door, her face pale. Mrs. Potts, the cook, was questioned briefly. She'd been in the kitchen since 5 o'clock a.m., preparing breakfast, with no view of the library. At noon, the crunch of gravel announced a car's arrival. I hurried to the door, and there stood Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his patent leather shoes and pinstripe suit, his mustache waxed to perfection. His green eyes gleamed with curiosity as he surveyed the hall. "Hastings, mon ami, you have stumbled into a drama most intriguing. A button, you say, and a letter opener. Bean, let us begin. The truth, it hides in the details, and Poirot shall find it." Word count, 1412. Chapter 3. The little gray cells awakened. The arrival of Hercule Poirot at Elmwood Hall was like the introduction of a precise instrument into a room full of discordant notes. As I led him into the drawing room, where the household had reconvened, under the watchful eye of Inspector Hargreaves, a hush fell over the assembly. Poirot, with his egg-shaped head tilted slightly and his cat-like eyes scanning each face in turn, exuded an air of calm authority that contrasted sharply with the inspector's blustering efficiency. He paused at the threshold, adjusting his gloves, with meticulous care, as if the very act of entering demanded perfection. "Bonjour, Ms. Amos," he said, his voice smooth and accented, carrying the weight of continental sophistication. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I have been summoned by my good friend Captain Hastings to assist in this most unfortunate affair. Inspector, I presume you are the officer in charge." Hargreaves, a burly man with a ruddy complexion and a mustache that drooped like wilted ferns, nodded curtly. "That's right, Mr. Poirot. Heard of you, of course. Scotland Yard speaks highly, but this is a local matter. Stabbing in the library, nasty business. We've got the scene secured." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "Excellent, Inspector. Poirot does not wish to intrude upon your domain, but perhaps, with your permission, I might examine the scene, the method. It is everything." Nest's pause. The inspector hesitated, then shrugged. "Can't hurt, I suppose. Follow me." As we proceeded to the library, Poirot walked with his characteristic mincing step, his cane tapping lightly on the parquet floor. I fell in beside him, eager to share my observations. "Poirot, the body is still there, Langford. Stabbed with a letter opener. Time of death around 7 to 8 this morning. And there's a button on the floor brass, torn off, perhaps." He held up a hand, his eyes twinkling. "Patience, Hastings. The facts. They will reveal themselves in order. One must not rush the symphony. The library door stood ajar, guarded by a constable who stepped aside at Hargreaves' nod. Inside, the scene remained as I had last seen it. Langford's body slumped forward. The blood now congealed into a dark stain on the blotter. The air held a metallic tang, mingled with the musty scent of old books. Poirot approached slowly, his gaze sweeping the room like a lighthouse beam, taking in the shelves, the desk, the carpet, the closed window. He circled the desk without touching anything, his head cocked as if listening to whispers from the shadows. Ah, the letter opener silver, engraved with the initials R.A. Colonel Ashby's, no doubt. He glanced at Hargreaves for confirmation. The inspector nodded. Yes, from the desk set. Weapon of convenience. Looks like convenience or calculation, Poirot murmured. He bent closer, examining the wound without disturbing the fabric. A single thrust, precise, fatal. The killer knew anatomy, or was fortunate. But Poirot does not believe in fortune. His eyes alighted on the button, lying innocuously, near the desk leg. With a handkerchief, he picked it up delicately, holding it to the light. Brass, military style, with a shank and frayed thread, torn in a struggle, perhaps, or placed to mislead. I leaned in. I noticed it earlier. Doesn't match Langford's suit. His buttons are pearl. Poirot smiled faintly. Being observe, Hastings. The little details, they speak volumes. He pocketed the button after showing it to Hargreaves, who made a note. Next, he inspected the paper beneath Langford's hand, a half-written letter. The ink smudged by blood. The visible words read, Dear Reginald, I must insist on full disclosure regarding the Cairo affair. Or affidavit, Poirot pondered aloud. Interrupted mid-sentence. The pen still in his grasp, he did not expect the blow. Hargreaves cleared his throat. We've questioned the staff. The maid, Annie, saw him enter at 6:30. Butler brought coffee at 8 and found him. No one else admitted to being here. Poirot nodded absently, his fingers drumming on his cane. And the alibis? Everyone has one, I suppose. The inspector flipped his notebook. Colonel was in his study from 7. Reviewing accounts seen by his wife at 7:15. Lady Eleanor was in her room until breakfast at 8. Major Gerald claims he was asleep till the scream no witness. Miss Violet was walking in the garden from 7. Says she saw no one. Dr. Baxter was in his guest room, writing letters. Mrs. Fenton was dressing. Staff were in the kitchens or servants' quarters. Poirot's mustache twitched. Alibis like Swiss cheese full of holes. The garden walk. The solitary writing opportunities abound. He straightened. Inspector, with your indulgence, I should like to speak with the household. Psychology. It is the key. The human mind betrays itself in the smallest ways. Hargreaves grunted assent, and we returned to the drawing room. The group sat in tense silence, the fire crackling as if mocking their discomfort. The colonel rose. As we entered, his face etched with strain. Mr. Poirot, thank heavens you're here. This is a nightmare. Langford was my partner, a good man, despite our differences. Poirot bowed slightly. My condolences, Colonel. Poirot shall do all in his power to bring light to this darkness. He seated himself in an armchair, arranging his coattails with care, and surveyed the room. Mesdames et messieurs, a tragedy has occurred, but together we shall uncover the truth. I ask only that you answer my questions with complete honesty. Lies, they are like weeds. They choke the garden of justice. He began with the colonel, his voice gentle yet probing. Tell me, mon colonel, of your relationship with Monsieur Langford. Business partners, oui, but there were tensions. The colonel hesitated, glancing at his wife. Yes, we'd argued lately. Our import business spices and artifacts from Egypt. Delays in shipments, financial discrepancies. Langford accused me of mishandling funds, but it was nonsense. We were sorting it out. And last night, over port, voices were raised. Poirot. Prompted. A bit heated, perhaps, but nothing to warrant this. Poirot nodded, turning to Lady Eleanor. Her blue eyes met his steadily, though her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Madam, you knew Monsieur Langford well. She inclined her head. He was a frequent guest, a shrewd businessman, but charming in his way. Charming, Poirot echoed softly. And yet, your sister, Madame Fenton, seemed less enamored. She laughed. Often, but her eyes, they did not smile. Mrs. Fenton flushed. I barely knew the man. He was always buried in ledgers. If you must know, he made advances once improper, but I rebuffed him. A murmur rippled through the room. Gerald snorted. Langford was a snake, owed money everywhere, including to me. Lost a packet at cards in Cairo, then tried to squeeze father for more. Violet gasped. Gerald. How can you speak ill now? Poirot intervened smoothly. Mademoiselle Violet, you were in the garden this morning. Did you hear or see anything unusual? She shook her head, her curls trembling. No, nothing. I needed air. The house felt stifling. I walked by the rose beds till breakfast. Dr. Baxter adjusted his spectacles. I was in my room, as I said, heard nothing till the scream. Poirot's gaze lingered on each, noting postures, glances, the way Gerald's fingers drummed on his knee, how Lady Eleanor's gaze flicked to the door. Trisbane. For now, that is sufficient. But remember, the truth, it has a way of emerging, like the sun after rain. As the group dispersed for a subdued luncheon, Poirot drew me aside in the hall. Hastings. What do you think? Motives swirl like leaves in the wine debts, affairs, feuds. It's baffling, I admitted. Anyone could have slipped into the library, unseen. The button perhaps from Gerald's uniform. He's a major. Poirot chuckled. Ah, Hastings. Always the romantic leap. But no, the button is military. Yes, but observe, the shank is bent, the thread navy blue. Details. My friend. And the letter, Cairo affair, or something more sinister. Inspector Hargreaves approached, his expression skeptical. Well, Mr. Poirot, any revelations? Patience, Inspector. The gray cells, they are at work. But tell me, has the body been removed? Yes, to the mortuary. Autopsy this afternoon. Bon. And the staff questioned them again. The maid, Annie, she seemed nervous. Hargreaves nodded grudgingly. Will do. The afternoon wore on. The house shrouded in gloom despite the sunny day. Poirot retired to the conservatory, ostensibly, to think, but I knew he was observing the comings and goings, the whispered conversations. I joined him, watching as Gerald paced the terrace, cigarette in hand, and Violet sat by the window, staring blankly. Something eats at them. Hastings, Poirot said quietly. A secret shared, or secrets hidden. The Whodunit is the thread we pull. As evening approached, a telegram arrived for the Colonel. News of business woes in London. His face darkened as he read it, crumpling the paper. Damn Langford's meddling, he muttered. Unaware, I overheard. Dinner was a strained affair. The empty chair at the table a silent accusation. Poirot ate sparingly, his manner polite, but distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. Afterward, as we gathered for coffee, he announced casually, tomorrow, we reconstruct the morning. Each in their places, we. The truth, it hides in the routine. The household retired early, the air thick with unspoken fears. In my room, I pondered the day's events, the button, the half-written letter. The alibis that seemed solid yet fragile. Poirot, I knew, was piecing it together, his little gray cells whirring like a well-oiled machine. But as I drifted to sleep, a chill ran through me. The killer was among us, and the web of deception was only beginning to unravel. Chapter 4. The interrogations begin the morning after Victor Langford's murder dawned gray and heavy, with clouds rolling in from the west, casting Elmwood Hall in a somber light that mirrored the mood within. Breakfast was a muted affair, the clink of cutlery and the murmur of strained pleasantries barely filling the silence left by the empty chair at the table. Hercule Poirot, however, seemed undeterred by the gloom, his demeanor as crisp as his starched collar. He sipped his coffee served precisely as he liked it, black and scalding, and observed the household with eyes that missed nothing. After breakfast, Poirot requested a private room to conduct interviews, and the colonel offered the small study adjoining the drawing room a cozy space with a writing desk, a leather armchair, and a window overlooking the rose garden. Inspector Hargreaves, though visibly irked by Poirot's involvement, agreed to observe, his notebook at the ready. I positioned myself near the door, prepared to take mental notes, as Poirot had often chided me for my haphazard record-keeping. Amos, Poirot began, addressing the assembled household in the drawing room before commencing. Today we seek the truth through order and method. Each of you will speak with me, alone, and I ask only for candor. The smallest detail a glance, a word, a moment may unlock this mystery. Hastings, Inspector, let us proceed. The first to be summoned was Simmons, the butler, whose impeccable posture seemed slightly strained as he entered the study. Poirot gestured to the armchair, his smile disarming yet keen. Monsieur Simmons, you are the eyes and ears of this house. Tell me of the morning of the murder. You brought coffee to Monsieur Langford at 8. Simmons nodded, his hands clasped tightly. Yes, sir. It's my custom to bring Mr. Langford his coffee when he works in the library. I knocked at 8 precisely, entered, and found him. As you know, I touched nothing, sir, and called for the colonel at once. And before that, you saw no one near the library? No, sir. I was in the pantry from 7, polishing silver. Annie, the maid, was sweeping the hall earlier. She might have seen something. Poirot's mustache twitched. Annie, yes. And Monsieur Langford, he was often in the library early? Most mornings, sir. Since he arrived a fortnight ago. He and the colonel were working on some business papers, Egyptian imports, I believe. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And the mood of the house, tensions, disagreements, Simmons hesitated, his eyes flickering to the door. It's not my place to say, sir, but there were raised voices. Mr. Langford and the colonel, 2 nights ago, in the study, something about funds not tallying. And Major Gerald, he and Mr. Langford had words over dinner last week. Gambling debts, I gathered. Mercy, Simmons, you have been most helpful. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, and the butler exited. His relief palpable. Next came Annie, the maid, a slight girl with wide eyes and a nervous habit of twisting her apron. She confirmed seeing Langford enter the library at 6:30 a.m. as she swept the hall. He looked agitated, sir, pacing, muttering to himself. I didn't hear what he said. And you saw no one else? Poirot pressed gently. No, sir. I was in the kitchens after that, helping Mrs. Potts with breakfast. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And the button, mademoiselle? The brass button on the library floor, have you seen such a one before? Annie blushed, shaking her head. I don't know, sir. There's so many buttons about coats, uniforms. I sweep them up sometimes, but I didn't notice that one till you mentioned it. As Annie laughed, Poirot murmured to me, the button, Hastings, it is curious. military, yet no one claims it. We must examine the wardrobes later. Lady Eleanor was next, her composure a stark contrast to Annie's nerves. She sat gracefully, her hands folded in her lap, her blue eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. Monsieur Poirot, I assure you I know nothing of this dreadful business. Victor was a colleague of my husband's, nothing more. Poirot tilted his head. And yet, madam, your sister suggested he made advances. Did he ever discomfit you? Her lips tightened. Victor was charming, as I said, but occasionally overfamiliar. I dismissed it as his manner. He meant no harm. And your movements yesterday morning. I was in my room from 6:30, dressing and writing letters. I joined Reginald for breakfast at 8. Poirot nodded, scribbling in a small notebook. And the letter on the desk, the one beginning, Dear Reginald. Did you know of its contents? She paled slightly. No. Victor often wrote to Reginald about business. I paid it no mind. As she departed, Poirot turned to Hargreaves. The lady, she is poised, but there is a tremor in her voice when she speaks of Langford. Something lies beneath. Major Gerald Ashby followed, his demeanor sullen. He sprawled in the chair, lighting a cigarette despite Poirot's raised eyebrow. Look, I didn't like Langford. He was a cheat at cards and a bully in business. Owed me £50 from a game in Cairo never paid up. And your argument with him? Poirot asked. Gerald shrugged. Over dinner last week. I called him out on it. He laughed it off, said I'd get my money when the business turned a profit. Smug devil. Your movements yesterday morning, asleep. Till the scream woke me. I'd had a few too many the night before. He grinned faintly, but his eyes were wary. Poirot's gaze lingered on Gerald's jacketed tweed affair with horn buttons. Your uniform, Major, do you wear it often? Not here. Left it in Cairo, mostly. Why a detail? Merely, Poirot dismissed him, but whispered to me, his jacket horn, not brass. But the military connection, it nags. Violet Ashby entered next, her delicate frame trembling slightly. She clutched a handkerchief, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know anything, Monsieur Poirot. I was in the garden, as I said. I needed to clear my head. Clear it of what? Mademoiselle. Poirot's tone was gentle, almost paternal. She hesitated, tears welling. Father's been so worried about money. And Gerald, he's been reckless. I overheard Victor talking to father about selling part of the estate. It broke my heart. And Langford, did he trouble you? She shook her head quickly. No, he was kind in his way, but distant. Poirot thanked her, and as she left, he sighed. The young lady, she protects someone, her brother, perhaps. Dr. Baxter was next, his professional air tinged with unease. I'm a doctor, not a detective, Mr. Poirot. I was writing letters in my room from 6:30 till breakfast. Heard nothing, saw nothing. And your opinion of Langford? Baxter adjusted his spectacles. A patient of mine, occasionally. High blood pressure, nerves. He was under strain business troubles. I'd wager. Finally, Mrs. Fenton bustled in, her florid cheeks flushed. This is also dreadful. I barely knew Mr. Langford, but he was forward. Tried to kiss me once, at a garden party. I told him where to go, and yesterday morning, Poirot asked, dressing. As I said, my room's on the east wing far, from the library. As she left, Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. Each tells a truth, but not the whole truth. Hastings. The button, the letter, the alibis, they form a puzzle. And the Cairo affair, what is this of that Langford wished to disclose? Hargreaves snorted. Sounds like you're spinning theories, Mr. Poirot. I'm focusing on Gerald's motive. no alibi, and a temper. Poirot smiled enigmatically. The obvious, Inspector, is rarely the correct. Let us examine the library again, and then the wardrobes. The Whodunit calls to us. We returned to the library, now cleared of the body, but still sealed. Poirot examined the desk, the carpet, the window latch. He paused by the fireplace, noting a faint smudge of ash. Curious, he murmured, scraping it into a handkerchief. Not tobacco, something else. As we exited, Annie passed us, carrying a tray. Her eyes widened at Poirot's gaze, and she hurried away. That girl, he said softly. She knows more than she says. The day wore on, with Poirot requesting access to the guests' rooms to inspect their clothing. Hargreaves grumbled, but complied, and we found no brass buttons matching the one from the library. Gerald's wardrobe held only civilian clothes, confirming his claim about his uniform. Yet Poirot lingered over a navy blue coat in the colonel's closet, its buttons silver, not brass. As evening fell, Poirot sat in the conservatory, sipping tisane and staring at the darkening garden. Hastings, he said at last, the pieces are there, but the picture is not yet clear. Tomorrow, we reenact the morning, and we watch especially the maid. I nodded, though my mind swirled with questions. The button, the letter, the ash, what did they mean? Only Poirot, with his little gray cells, could weave them into a tapestry of truth. Word count, 1423. Chapter 5, The Red Herring's second day at Elmwood Hall brought a drizzle that pattered against the windows, cloaking the estate in a veil of mist that seemed to mirror the fog of suspicion enveloping its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the weather, was in high spirits as we gathered in the drawing room after a subdued breakfast. His eyes gleamed with the quiet excitement of a man who sensed the puzzle pieces beginning to align. Though to me, the mystery of Victor Langford's murder remained as opaque as the overcast sky. Inspector Hargreaves, his notebook dog-eared from constant use, had taken a firm stance on Major Gerald Ashby as the prime suspect. Motive, opportunity, and a hot temper, he declared, addressing the household as Poirot listened with an air of polite detachment. Young Ashby owed Langford money, argued with him publicly, and has no witness to his whereabouts at the time of the murder. I've half a mind to arrest him now. Gerald, lounging in an armchair with a cigarette dangling from his lips, shot to his feet. His face flushed. That's absurd. I didn't like the man, but I didn't kill him. I was asleep, as I've said a dozen times. The colonel placed a restraining hand on his son's shoulder. Steady, lad. Inspector, you've no evidence, just supposition. My son's no murderer. Hargreaves bristled. We'll see about that once the autopsy report comes in. And that letter opener, your initials, Colonel. Care to explain how it ended up in Langford's bag? The colonel's jaw tightened. It's from my desk set, as anyone in this house could have known. Someone took it to make trouble. Poirot, who had been polishing his cane's silver knob with a handkerchief, raised a hand. Messieurs, let us not leap to the guillotine. The truth, it is not served by haste. Inspector, your theory is logical, but logic without method is like a cart without wheels, it goes nowhere. I propose we reenact the morning's events, precisely as they occurred, to test these alibis. Hargreaves frowned, but nodded. Very well. Mr. Poirot, let's see what your theatrics turn up. Poirot clapped his hands, his voice brisk. Bon, everyone, to your places as they were yesterday morning between 6:30 and 8. Colonel, to your study. Lady Eleanor, your room. Major Gerald, your bed. Mademoiselle Violet, the garden. Dr. Baxter, your letters. Madame Fenton, your dressing. Simmons, the pantry. Annie, the hall. Mrs. Potts, the kitchen. I shall observe. And Hastings, you will assist. The household complied with varying degrees of reluctance, dispersing to their assigned locations. Poirot and I began in the hall, where Annie, clutching a broom, reenacted her sweeping. Her movements were jerky, her eyes darting to the library door. Poirot watched her closely, his head tilted like a bird studying a crumb. Mademoiselle Annie, he said softly, you swept here at 6:30. We, and saw Monsieur Langford enter the library. Did he carry anything, a briefcase? Perhaps Annie shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, sir. Just himself. He looked cross, like he'd had a row. And you heard nothing after? No voices, no footsteps? No, sir. I finished sweeping and went to the kitchen by 7. Poirot nodded, motioning her to continue. We moved to the colonel's study, where he sat at his desk, surrounded by ledgers. He looked up as we entered, his face weary. This is pointless, Poirot. I was here, going over accounts. Eleanor popped in at 7:15 to ask about the shooting party. And you heard nothing from the library? Poirot asked. Nothing. It's down the hall too far. We proceeded to Lady Eleanor's room, where she sat at a vanity, brushing her hair with studied calm. I was here, as I said, Monsieur Poirot, writing to a friend in London. Reginald came to the door briefly, but I saw no one else. Poirot's eyes flicked to her wardrobe, where a navy blue coat hung among her dresses. Madam, this coat is yours? Yes, she replied, a touch too quickly. I wear it for walks in the garden. He nodded, saying nothing, and we moved on to Gerald's room. He lay on his bed, feigning sleep, though his cigarette betrayed his wakefulness. I told you. I was out cold, he muttered. Didn't hear a thing till the scream. Violet, in the garden, stood by the rose beds, her shawl damp from the drizzle. I walked here, alone, she said, her voice trembling. I saw no one, not even Annie. Dr. Baxter, in his guest room, sat at a desk with a stack of letters, his pen poised. Writing to colleagues, he said curtly. Medical correspondence. Didn't leave the room. Mrs. Fenton, in her room, was adjusting a hat before a mirror. Dressing takes time, Mr. Poirot. I was here till breakfast. In the kitchen, Mrs. Potts was kneading dough, her face red from the heat. Been here since 5, sir. Didn't see or hear nothing. Simmons, in the pantry, was polishing silver with mechanical precision. I was here, as I said. No one came through except Annie, heading to the kitchen. The reenactment complete, we returned to the drawing room. Hargreaves looked triumphant. Proves my point, Gerald's the only one without a witness. He could have slipped into the library, stabbed Langford, and been back in bed before anyone noticed. Poirot raised a finger. Not so fast, Inspector. The absence of a witness is not proof of guilt. Consider the button brass, military. Yet no one's clothing matches. And the ash I found in the library, not tobacco, but paper, perhaps burned to conceal evidence. Hargreaves scoffed. Burned paper? You're grasping at straws. Non, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The straws, they form a pattern. Hastings, tell me, what did you observe during our little charade? I frowned, recalling the details. Annie seemed nervous, more so than yesterday, and Lady Eleanor, she was quick to claim that coat. Gerald's cigarette was fresh, not like he'd just woken up. Precisement. Poirot clapped his hands. The small things betray. Annie, she sweeps, but her eyes are on the library. Lady Eleanor, she protects her coat. Why? And Gerald, he smokes to calm nerves, not to feign sleep. Before Hargreaves could retort, a constable entered, holding a folded paper. Autopsy. Report, sir. Langford died instantly, single stab to the heart. 7:30 to 8 a.m. No defensive wounds. No signs of a struggle. Poirot's eyebrows rose. No struggle. Then the killer was known to him, trusted enough to approach closely. And the letter opener, it was taken from the desk. Yes. Not brought to the scene. Hargreaves nodded grudgingly. Looks that way. The room stirred as the household rejoined us, their faces a mix of curiosity and dread. Gerald glared at Hargreaves, while Violet clung to her mother's arm. The colonel stood stiffly, his eyes on Poirot. Well, Mr. Poirot. What now, Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding. We consider the red herrings, Major. Gerald is the obvious suspect, his debt, his temper, his lack of alibi. But the obvious, it is a trap. The button, the ash, the letter, they point elsewhere. I shall require a list of all garments in this house with brass buttons, and I wish to see the servants' quarters. Hargreaves rolled his eyes but issued the order. As the group dispersed, Poirot drew me aside. Hastings, the killer, is clever, but not clever enough. The Whodunit is not an accident. Someone wishes us to look at Gerald, to see the military man, but the coat of Lady Eleanor navy blue, like the thread on the button, and Annie, she knows something, but fear seals her lips. We spent the afternoon inspecting the servants' quarters, finding nothing but plain clothing and no brass buttons. Yet Poirot lingered by Annie's small room, noting a sewing kit on her table. Thread. Hastings navy blue, like our button. Coincidence? Poirot thinks not. As evening approached, a telegram arrived for Poirot from a contact in London. A brief note about Langford's business dealings, confirming financial irregularities in the Cairo shipments. Aha, Poirot murmured. The Cairo of not an affair, but an affidavit, perhaps. Evidence of fraud. Dinner was tense, with Hargreaves eyeing Gerald like a hawk. Poirot, however, was serene, sipping his soup and dropping casual remarks about human nature. The heart, it betrays itself in the smallest ways, he said, his gaze sweeping the table. A glance, a pause, a button left behind. As we retired, I felt the net tightening, though the killer's identity remained elusive. Poirot, I knew, was closing in, his mind weaving the threads of evidence into a tapestry only he could yet see. Word count, 1418. Chapter 6, a clue in detail. Drizzle of the previous day had given way to a biting wind. By the third morning at Elmwood Hall, rattling the windows and lending a restless energy to the house, the atmosphere within was no less turbulent, with suspicion hanging over the inhabitants like a storm cloud. Hercule Poirot, however, remained a beacon of calm, his meticulous nature undeterred by the mounting tension. As we gathered in the drawing room after a breakfast marked by strained silences, he announced his intention to examine the library once more, insisting that the smallest detail, overlooked by others, speaks loudest to Poirot. Inspector Hargreaves, his patience fraying, accompanied us, grumbling about fanciful detective work. I followed, eager to see what Poirot's keen eye might uncover. The library, though cleared of Langford's body, retained an air of grim finality, its shelves and desk bathed in the pale light filtering through the misted windows. Poirot moved with deliberate precision, his gloved hands hovering over surfaces as if coaxing secrets from the very air. He paused by the desk, where the blood-stained blotter had been removed, replaced by a clean one. A pity, he murmured, for the blood. It tells a story. But the letter, where is it now? Inspector Hargreaves produced the half-written sheet from an evidence folder. Its ink smudged but legible. Dear Reginald, I must insist on full disclosure regarding the Cairo AFF. Poirot studied it, his lips pursed. The word, it is cut off. affidavit, perhaps, or affair, the mind of the victim. It was preoccupied with this. He turned his attention to the floor, where the brass button had been found. Kneeling with surprising agility for a man of his fastidious nature, he examined the carpet, his fingers brushing the fibers. Here, Hastings, do you see a faint indentation, not from the button, but nearby? Something heavy, perhaps a shoe, pressed here. I squinted, seeing nothing but the weave of the rug. A shoe. But the carpet's thick, how can you tell? Poirot smiled faintly. The eye. It must be trained to see what others miss. The pressure. It is subtle, but present. And here, he pointed to a minuscule speck of ash. Missed in the initial sweep. More ash, like that in the fireplace. Not tobacco, but paper. Burned hastily. Hargreaves snorted. Ash and dense. You're building castles in the air, Poirot. Non-inspector. Castles are built on foundations, and these are mine. Poirot rose, dusting his gloves. Now, let us consider the button itself. He produced the brass button from his pocket, held in a handkerchief, and turned it to catch the light. Military, yes, but the shanket is bent, as if forced, and the thread navy blue. Not common in military uniforms, which favor black or khaki. I frowned. You mentioned Lady Eleanor's coat yesterday. Could the thread be from that? Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But we must verify. And Annie, the maid, her sewing kit had navy thread. A coincidence. Poirot does not believe in them. We left the library, Poirot insisting on a visit to the servants' quarters again. Hargreaves, though skeptical, sent for Annie, who appeared clutching her apron, her face pale. Mademoiselle. Poirot began gently. Your sewing kit contains navy thread. Have you repaired any garments recently with such a thread? Annie's eyes widened, and she stammered. I mend things, sir, for the household. Coats, dresses. I don't recall anything specific. But you are nervous, Poirot pressed, his voice soft but unyielding. You know something, perhaps, about the button. She shook her head vigorously. No, sir. I swear, I only swept the hall. I didn't go in the library till Simmons called. Poirot nodded, dismissing her, but his expression was thoughtful. She hides something. Hastings, fear, or loyalty. We shall see. Next. Poirot requested to see Lady Eleanor's navy coat again. In her room, she produced it reluctantly, her composure faltering as Poirot examined the button's silver, not brass. Madam, this coated is worn often, for walks, yes, she replied, her voice tight. It's practical for the country. And no brass buttons. No repairs with navy thread. None, she said firmly, though her fingers twisted her handkerchief. As we left, Poirot whispered, the coat, it is to clean, to perfect. A new purchase, perhaps, to replace one damaged or lost. The morning progressed with Poirot's inquiries growing more pointed. He spoke with Mrs. Potts, the cook, who confirmed her kitchen duties kept her far from the library. But I heard Mr. Langford and the Colonel arguing 2 days ago, she admitted. In the dining room, after supper. Something about falsified records. I didn't linger, none of my business. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Falsified records most interesting. The Cairo affair grows clearer. Back in the drawing room, the household gathered for luncheon, the tension palpable. Gerald smoked incessantly, his eyes darting to Hargreaves, who watched him like a hawk. Violet sat silently, her hands clasped, while Lady Eleanor maintained her poise, though her gaze lingered on Poirot. The Colonel, red-faced, muttered about the disruption to his household, and Mrs. Fenton chattered nervously about the weather. Poirot, however, was serene, his mind clearly elsewhere. During a lull, He addressed the group. Mesdames et messieurs, a detail has emerged, a small thing, but vital. The button found in the library. It does not belong to any garment we have seen. Yet its thread navy blue suggests a connection to this house. I ask you all, have you seen such a button? Perhaps on a coat, a uniform, a servant's livery. A murmur rippled through the room, but no one spoke. Gerald stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary force. Haven't seen anything like it, he said curtly. Violet's voice was barely audible. Could it be from a guest's coat, someone from outside? Poirot smiled. A possibility, mademoiselle, but unlikely. The house was locked, the terrace door secured. No, the answer lies within these walls. Hargreaves cleared his throat. I'm still betting on Gerald. No alibi, motive up to his ears. And that letter sounds like Langford was about to expose something shady about the Colonel's business. The Colonel bristled. That's slander, Inspector. Langford and I had disagreements, but nothing criminal. Poirot raised a hand. Peace, messieurs. The letter, it speaks of Cairo, a business matter, perhaps, but also a motive. Someone wished to silence Monsieur Langford before he could reveal more. As luncheon ended, Poirot drew me aside in the conservatory, where the wind rattled the glass panes. Hastings, the button is our anchor. It was not dropped by accident, it was placed, or torn to tell a story. And the ash-burned paper, perhaps a note destroyed to hide a secret. We must find what was burned. I frowned. But how? The fireplace was cleaned. But not perfectly. The ash, it lingers. And Anishi is the key, her fear. It is not for herself, but for another. Tonight, I shall watch her closely. The afternoon brought a new development. A telegram from Poirot's London contact, detailing Langford's financial troubles. He had been investigated for smuggling artifacts from Egypt, with the Colonel's firm implicated. An affidavit. Poirot mused, to clear his name, or to accuse another. This is what he wished to disclose. Dinner was a grim affair, with Hargreaves announcing plans to question Gerald formally the next day. Poirot, however, seemed unperturbed, his attention fixed on the smallest interactions, Zanny's trembling hands as she served, Lady Eleanor's quick glance at her husband, Violet's refusal to meet Gerald's eyes. As we retired, Poirot whispered, "Tomorrow, Hastings. We set a trap. The killer grows nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. The button, the ash, the letter, they will lead us to the truth." I nodded, though the web of clues seemed as tangled as ever. Yet I trusted Poirot's little gray cells, which were surely weaving a pattern I could not yet see. As I climbed the stairs to my room, the wind howled outside, and I felt the weight of an unseen presence, the killer, still among us, watching and waiting. Word count, 1426. Chapter 7, More Lies Surfaced. Fourth day at Elmwood Hall dawned with a fragile stillness, as if the house itself held its breath, awaiting the next revelation in the grim drama of Victor Langford's murder. The drizzle had ceased, but the sky remained overcast, casting a pallor over the estate that matched the strained faces of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, ever the picture of composure, sipped his morning tisane in the conservatory, his eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man who sensed the threads of the mystery beginning to converge. I joined him, my mind still wrestling with the clues: the brass button, the burned paper, the interrupted letter. "Poirot," I ventured, "Hargreaves is dead set on Gerald, but you seem unconvinced. What's your next move?" He set down his cup with a delicate clink. "Hastings. The inspector sees only the surface, the motive, the opportunity. But, Poirot, he looks deeper, to the psychology. The killer is clever, but their lies, they begin to crack. Today, we probe further into secrets hidden in plain sight. The household gathered in the drawing room at Poirot's request, their expressions a mix of weariness and wariness. Inspector Hargreaves stood by the fireplace, his notebook open, his gaze fixed on Gerald, who slouched in an armchair, lighting yet another cigarette. The colonel paced, his military bearing fraying at the edges, while Lady Eleanor sat with her usual poise, though her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief. Violet, pale and silent, kept her eyes on the floor, and Mrs. Fenton fanned herself nervously, her chatter subdued. Dr. Baxter adjusted his spectacles, his professional calm tinged with unease. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache immaculate. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice measured yet commanding, "the murder of Monsieur Langford is a puzzle. But the pieces, they fit together. Lies have been told, some small, some great. Today, I ask for the truth, for the smallest deception may shield the guilty." He turned to Gerald, whose cigarette paused mid-air. "Major Ashby, you have spoken of your debts to Monsieur Langford, £50, a matter of cards. But is there more? A quarrel, perhaps, beyond what you have admitted?" Gerald's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. "I've told you everything. Langford cheated at cards, owed me money, and was a thorn in Father's side. I didn't kill him, though I won't pretend I'm sorry he's gone." The colonel interjected, his face red. "That's enough, Gerald. Mr. Poirot, my son may be reckless, but he's no murderer." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, Colonel. Let us explore another thread. Madame Fenton, you mentioned Monsieur Langford's forward behavior. Yet I sense there is more to your dislike. Speak, s'il vous plaît." Mrs. Fenton flushed, her fan snapping shut. "Well, since you insist, Victor was more than forward. Last month, at a dinner here, he cornered me in the conservatory. He suggested I invest in his business, hinted at secrets about Reginald's finances. I told him to leave me alone, but he laughed, said he knew things that could ruin this family." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's composure faltered, her eyes darting to her sister. "Clarissa, why didn't you tell me?" Mrs. Fenton shrugged, her voice bitter. "You were always so fond of him, Eleanor. I didn't want to cause a scene." Poirot's gaze shifted to Lady Eleanor. "Madam, this fondness, how deep did it run? Did Monsieur Langford confide in you about these secrets?" Her lips tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might refuse to answer. "Victor was a colleague, nothing more," she said at last. "He spoke of business troubles, yes, but nothing specific. I dismissed his talk as exaggeration." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you, Mademoiselle Violet? You have been silent, yet your eyes, they see much. Did Monsieur Langford ever speak to you of these troubles?" Violet's hands trembled, and she clutched her shawl. He was kind to me, once. Said I reminded him of his sister, who died young. But lately, he seemed worried. I overheard him tell Father, 2 days ago, that he'd found proof something about forged documents in Cairo. I didn't understand." The colonel spun on her. "Violet, you never mentioned this. I didn't want to worry you, Father," she whispered, tears brimming. "You've been so strained." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Proof, you say? Most interesting. And you? Dr. Baxter, did Monsieur Langford consult you about his nerves, perhaps mentioning these documents?" Baxter cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "He did visit me, yes, a week ago. Complained of insomnia, stress, said his business. Was in trouble, something about a partner betraying him. I prescribed a mild sedative, nothing more." Hargreaves scribbled furiously, muttering, "Sounds like the colonel was the partner." Motive piling up. Poirot ignored him, turning to Simmons, who stood at attention by the door. Monsieur Simmons, you overheard an argument about falsified records. Did you hear more perhaps about these documents? Simmons hesitated, his face pale. I shouldn't speak out of turn, sir. But yes, 2 nights ago, in the study, Mr. Langford accused the colonel of hiding profits, said he. Had an affidavit to prove it. The colonel told him to keep quiet or face ruin. The room erupted in murmurs. The colonel's face turned purple. That's a lie. Langford was the one cooking the books. Trying to pin it on me, Poirot raised a hand for silence. Enough. The lies, they surface like bubbles in a stream. But one detail remains: the button. I have learned it matches none in this house, yet its navy thread suggests a connection. And the Ashburn paper, perhaps a note or document destroyed to hide the truth. He paced slowly, his cane tapping rhythmically. Let us consider the timeline. At 6:30, Annie sees Monsieur Langford enter the library, agitated. By 7, he is writing a letter, interrupted by death. The killer strikes between 7 and 8. With no struggle, no cry. The letter opener, taken from the desk, suggests a sudden act, yet the precision of the blow speaks of intent. And the button torn, perhaps in haste. Hargreaves interrupted. All points to Gerald. He's got no alibi, a grudge, and access to the library. Poirot smiled faintly. The obvious, Inspector, is a red herring. Consider. Why leave the button? To implicate a military man, perhaps, or to distract from the true killer. He turned to Annie, who had entered with a tray of tea, her hands shaking. Mademoiselle Annie, one last question. You're sewing kit navy thread, oui? Did you mend a garment recently, perhaps for someone in this house? Annie froze, the tray rattling. I mended a coat, sir, for Lady Eleanor. Her navy one. A button was loose, but it was silver, not brass. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Poirot nodded. Merci, Annie, you may go. As she fled, Poirot whispered to me, the maid. She protects her mistress, the coat perhaps. It once had brass buttons, replaced in haste. The afternoon brought a new development, a search of the library fireplace, ordered by Poirot. Among the ashes, a constable found a charred fragment of paper, bearing a single word in Langford's handwriting, affidavit. Poirot held it up, his eyes gleaming. The proof, it was burned but not entirely. Someone feared its contents. Dinner was a tense affair, with Hargreaves announcing plans to detain Gerald for further questioning. Poirot, however, remained serene, his attention fixed on the smallest details: Annie's nervous glances, Lady Eleanor's tight smile, Violet's clasped hands. As we retired, he drew me aside in the hall. Hastings, the lies multiply, but the truth emerges. The affidavit forged documents, perhaps implicating the colonel or another. The Whodunit is a clue, but also a deception. Tomorrow, we tighten the net. The killer. They grow careless. I nodded, though the tangle of motives, debts, betrayals, hidden documents seemed impenetrable. Yet Poirot's confidence was infectious, and as I climbed to my room, I felt the mystery inching toward its unraveling, driven by the relentless logic of his little gray cells. Word count, 1412. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. Fifth day at Elmwood Hall carried an air of inevitability, as if the weight of secrets long buried could no longer be contained. The morning was damp and cold, the mist clinging to the estate like a shroud, amplifying the tension that pulsed through the house. Hercule Poirot, ever the orchestrator of truth, seemed to sense the moment was ripe for a breakthrough. His demeanor at breakfast was serene yet purposeful. his green eyes darting from face to face as he sipped his tisane, noting every gesture, every faltering glance. Inspector Hargreaves, emboldened by the autopsy and the charred fragment of paper bearing the word affidavit, had doubled down on his suspicion of Major Gerald Ashby. "I'm bringing him in for formal questioning today," he announced over coffee, his tone brooking no argument. The debts, the lack of alibi, the argument about Cairo, it's all pointing to him. Gerald, pale and haggard, slammed his cup down, splashing coffee onto the tablecloth. "This is madness. I didn't touch Langford. You're hounding the wrong man, Inspector." The colonel rose, his voice thunderous. "Hargreaves, you're overstepping. My son is no killer, and I'll not have him treated like one in my own home." Lady Eleanor placed a restraining hand on her husband's arm, her face a mask of calm, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "Reginald, please. Let Mr. Poirot do his work. He'll find the truth." Violet, seated beside her mother, looked on the verge of tears, her hands twisting in her lap. Mrs. Fenton, uncharacteristically quiet, fanned herself slowly, while Dr. Baxter cleared his throat, murmuring about the need for calm. Simmons and Annie hovered at the edges, their faces pale, and Mrs. Potts bustled in with fresh toast, her expression grim. Poirot set down his cup with a delicate clink, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Mesdames et messieurs, the truth is near, but it requires courage to uncover. Today, I ask for your cooperation in a small experiment. We shall gather in the library at noon, and I shall pose questions that may unsettle. But the guilty, they will reveal themselves, for the heart cannot hide forever." Hargreaves snorted. "More theatrics, Poirot? I'd rather have Gerald in cuffs and be done with it." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Patience, Inspector. The cuffs, they come when the mind is certain. Hastings, accompany me to the library now. There is a detail yet to explore." We left the drawing room, the air thick with unease, and entered the library, where the scene of the crime seemed to linger like a ghost. The desk was bare, the blood-stained blotter gone, but Poirot moved with purpose, kneeling once more by the spot where the brass button had been found. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket, examining the carpet with the intensity of an archaeologist uncovering a relic. "Hastings," he said softly, "the indentation I noted before it is not from a shoe, but from something smaller, perhaps a cane or a stick. And the ashes are this." He pointed to a faint smudge near the fireplace, overlooked by the constables. "Not just paper, but wax, perhaps from a seal. A document was burned, but hastily, leaving traces." I frowned. "A sealed document, like the affidavit Langford mentioned prescience. Someone wished to destroy evidence, but time was short." He rose, dusting his gloves. "And the Whodunit's placement is deliberate. A distraction or a signature." Before I could respond, a soft sob echoed from the doorway. We turned to find Violet, her face pale, her eyes brimming with tears. She clutched the doorframe, trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, I can't keep silent anymore. It's too much." Poirot approached her gently, his voice soothing. "Mademoiselle, speak. The truth. It is a burden lifted." She sank into a chair, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's about Gerald. He didn't kill Mr. Langford, but he's in trouble. I overheard him talking to someone on the telephone 3 nights ago. He was angry, saying he'd deal with Langford if he didn't get his money. I thought he meant cards, but now I'm so afraid." Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "And this Culho, was it too?" "I don't know," she whispered. "A man, not from here. Gerald said something about Cairo. About papers being forged. I didn't understand, but he sounded desperate. I exchanged a glance with Poirot. This was new Gerald's involvement. In the Cairo affair seemed deeper than mere gambling debts. Poirot patted Violet's hand. Mercy. Mademoiselle, you have done well. Rest now and say nothing to the others. As Violet left, tears streaming down her cheeks, Poirot turned to me. The dam breaks, Hastings. The young lady's confessionate shifts the puzzle. Gerald is entangled, but is he the killer or a pawn? At noon, the household assembled in the library, their faces a tableau of apprehension. Hargreaves stood by the desk, arms crossed, while Poirot took center stage, his cane planted firmly before him. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, a murder has been committed, and the clues they point to a web of deceit. A button, a burned document, a letter unfinished. But it is the human heart that betrays the truth. Let us examine the morning once more. He turned to Annie, who stood near the door, clutching a tray. Mademoiselle Annie, you saw Monsieur Langford at 6:30, entering this room. But you lingered. Perhaps you heard something, a voice, a step. Annie's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. No, sir, I swear. I swept and left. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Yet your hands, they tremble. And you're sewing kit navy thread, like that on the button. Did you mend a garment for someone? Perhaps one with brass buttons? The tray slipped from Annie's hands, clattering to the floor. She gasped, her face white. It wasn't me. I mended Lady Eleanor's coat. Yes, but the buttons were silver. I swear. I didn't. Lady Eleanor rose, her voice sharp. Annie, enough, Monsieur Poirot. This is absurd. My coat has silver buttons, as you've seen. Poirot nodded slowly. Oui, madame, now it does. But before, perhaps a button was lost, replaced in haste. The room fell silent, all eyes on Lady Eleanor. Her composure cracked, her lips trembling. I don't know what you mean. Before Poirot could press further, Gerald leapt up, his voice hoarse. Stop this. You're all looking at me, but I didn't do it. Yes, I argued with Langford he was ruining us. He had proof father was hiding profits, forged documents to cover it. I told him to back off, or I'd expose him for smuggling. But I didn't kill him. The colonel's face drained of color. Gerald, you fool. What have you done? Poirot raised a hand. Silence. S'il vous plaît. Major Ashby. This telephone call Mademoiselle Violet overheard. To whom did you speak? Gerald froze, then slumped back in his chair. A contact in Cairo. A dealer who knew Langford's tricks. He said Langford was planning to blackmail father with that affidavit. The room erupted in gasps. Hargreaves stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. That's it, then, Gerald. You're under arrest, non. Poirot's voice cut through like a whip. The confession, it is partial. The killer is among us. But the net is not yet tight. The button, the ash, the affidavit, they tell a story. But we lack the final chapter. As the group dispersed, shaken by the revelations, Poirot drew me aside. Hastings. The emotional floodgates open. Gerald is involved, but not alone. The button, it points to Lady Eleanor's coat. Yet she denies it. And Annie, she protects her mistress. But why? Tonight, we watch. The killer will move, for the truth is too close. Dinner was a somber affair, with Gerald under Hargreaves' watchful eye and Violet barely touching her food. Poirot, however, was serene, his mind clearly spinning the threads of evidence into a pattern only he could see. As we retired, he whispered, "The trap is set, Hastings. Tomorrow, we spring it." I lay awake that night. the weight of Violet's tears and Gerald's confession heavy on my mind. The killer was near, and Poirot's little gray cells were closing in, relentless as the tide. Chapter 9. The trap's sixth day at Elmwood Hall broke with a restless energy, the air thick with the promise of resolution. The mist had lifted, revealing a sky of unbroken gray, and the house seemed to pulse with the unspoken fears of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, ever the master of timing, had declared that this evening he would gather the household for a final reckoning, a psychological trap to coax the truth from the web of lies surrounding Victor Langford's murder. As I joined him in the conservatory after breakfast, his demeanor was one of quiet confidence. His mustache impeccably waxed, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. "Hastings," he said, adjusting his tie with a flourish, "today we set the stage. The killer grows nervous for the clues, the button, the ash. The affidavit close in like the walls of a labyrinth. Tonight, in the library, we shall apply pressure, and the guilty will crack." I nodded, though my stomach churned with anticipation. "You're certain it's not Gerald? Hargreaves is ready to haul him off." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The inspector, he sees the obvious motive, opportunity, but Poirot sees the heart. Gerald is entangled. But the hand that struck was guided by another. The Whodunit is the key, and tonight it will unlock the truth." The day passed in a haze of tension. Inspector Hargreaves, bristling with impatience, shadowed Gerald, who smoked incessantly, his face drawn. The colonel alternated between bluster and brooding silence, while Lady Eleanor maintained her icy composure, though her eyes darted nervously when Poirot entered a room. Violet, fragile as ever, kept to her mother's side, her tears replaced by a quiet resolve. Mrs. Fenton chattered to fill the silence, her laughter hollow, and Dr. Baxter busied himself with medical journals, avoiding conversation. Poirot spent the morning in the library, examining the fireplace once more. He retrieved another fragment of charred paper, this one bearing a partial seal in red wax, its design obscured but suggestive of an official document. "The affidavit," he murmured, "or a letter of accusation, burned to hide its contents, but not entirely destroyed." He also requested a detailed inventory of the household's garments, focusing on coats and jackets. Simmons, the butler, provided a list, confirming no brass buttons among the family's attire. Yet Poirot lingered over Lady Eleanor's navy coat, now hanging in the hall, its silver buttons gleaming. "Too new," he whispered to me. "A replacement, perhaps, for one that bore the fatal button." At luncheon, Poirot announced his plan. "Mesdames et messieurs, tonight at 8. We gather in the library. I shall reconstruct the crime, and the truth will emerge. I ask only that you bring an open mind and a truthful heart." The household murmured assent, though their faces betrayed unease. Hargreaves muttered about parlor tricks, but agreed to attend. As the day wore on, Poirot was a whirlwind of activity, conferring with the constables, inspecting the terrace, doors still locked, and questioning any once more. The maid, near chairs, insisted she knew nothing beyond mending Lady Eleanor's coat, but her trembling hands told another story. As evening approached, the house grew quiet, the servants moving with hushed efficiency. Simmons prepared the library, arranging chairs in a semicircle before the desk, where the murder had occurred. The fire was lit, casting flickering shadows on the bookshelves, and the air was heavy with the scent of wax. An old leather dot at 8 o'clock, the household assembled, their faces a gallery of apprehension. The colonel stood stiffly, his hands clasped behind his back. Lady Eleanor sat with regal poise, her eyes fixed on Poirot. Gerald slouched, his cigarette smoldering, while Violet clutched her shawl, her gaze distant. Mrs. Fenton fanned herself. Her cheeks flushed, and Dr. Baxter adjusted his spectacles, his fingers restless. Simmons and Annie stood at the back, with Mrs. Potts lingering by the door. Hargreaves leaned against the wall, his notebook ready. Poirot took center stage, his cane planted firmly, his voice clear and commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, we are here to unravel the murder of Victor Langford, a man whose death has torn the fabric of this house. The clues are simple, yet profound. A brass button, a burned document, a letter unfinished. Let us walk through the morning of the crime. He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. At 6:30, Monsieur Langford enters this library, seen by Annie. He is agitated, perhaps writing his letter to the Colonel. Dear Reginald, I must insist on full disclosure regarding the Cairo AFF and affidavit we now know, accusing someone of fraud in Egyptian trade. By 7:30, he is dead, stabbed with the Colonel's letter opener, a single precise blow to the heart. No struggle, no cry. The killer is known to him, trusted. He paused, letting the words sink. In the button brass, military, with navy thread is found here. He pointed to the floor near the desk. It matches no garment in this house, yet its thread suggests a connection. The ash in the fireplace paper, wax, a seal points to a document burned to hide the truth. Gerald shifted uneasily, and Hargreaves' eyes narrowed. Poirot continued, his voice soft but relentless. Let us consider the alibis. The Colonel, in his study. Lady Eleanor, in her room. Gerald, asleep. Violet, in the garden. Dr. Baxter, writing. Mrs. Fenton, dressing. The servants in their duties. All plausible, yet all unverified. But one person lied. He turned to Annie, who flinched under his gaze. Mademoiselle Annie, you swept the hall, but you lingered. You heard voices, we, Langford, and another speak. Or the truth will find you. Annie's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. I didn't mean to lie, sir. I heard Mr. Langford arguing low voices through the door. I couldn't hear who, but it was a woman. I swear, I didn't see anything. A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's hand tightened on her chair, and Violet stifled a sob. Poirot nodded. Mercy. Annie, the truth. It begins to emerge. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Madam, your coat navy, with silver buttons. But before, did it have brass ones, a button lost? Perhaps, in a moment of haste, her composure shattered. Her voice sharp. This is outrageous. My coat has always had silver buttons. I've done nothing wrong. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet, the thread navy, like your coat. And the affidavit, did it threaten you, madam, a secret, perhaps beyond business? The Colonel stepped forward, his face thunderous. Enough, Poirot. You're accusing my wife without proof. Poirot raised a hand. Not accusing, Colonel inquiring. But the net tightens. Someone in this room burned the affidavit, left the button, struck the blow. Tonight, I give you this chance. Confess, and the law may be lenient. Silence fell, heavy as lead. Then, to everyone's shock, Violet stood, her voice trembling, but clear. It wasn't Mother. It was me. I went to the library to beg Mr. Langford to stop pressuring Father. He laughed, said he'd ruin us. I grabbed the letter opener in a panic. I didn't mean to kill him. The room erupted. Gerald leapt to his sister's side, and the Colonel roared, Violet, no. Lady Eleanor clutched her daughter, sobbing, while Hargreaves moved to intervene. Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. Non, mademoiselle, your confession is noble, but false. You protect someone, your mother, perhaps. The button, it is not yours. The blow, too precise for panic. Sit and let Poirot finish. Violet collapsed, weeping, and Poirot's gaze swept the room. The trap is sprung. The killer feels the pressure. Tomorrow, we conclude. As the group dispersed, shaken, Poirot whispered to me, Hastings, Violet's light shields another. The button, the ash, the woman's voice, they point to one heart, torn by fear and desperation. I retired that night, my mind reeling. Violet's confession, though false, had cracked the facade. The killer was cornered, and Poirot's trap was closing. Chapter 10. The reveal. Seventh day at Elmwood Hall dawned with a brittle clarity. The gray skies parting to reveal a weak sun that did little to warm the chill of suspicion. Pervading the house, the events of the previous evening. Violet's tearful, false confession and Poirot's declaration that the killer was cornered had left the household in a state of uneasy anticipation. Breakfast was a silent affair, with only the clink of cutlery and the rustle of newspapers breaking the tension. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever, sipped his tisane with serene confidence, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of a man who had solved the puzzle. Inspector Hargreaves, however, was restless, his faith in Gerald as the culprit shaken by Violet's outburst. I don't know what game you're playing, Poirot, he muttered as we gathered in the drawing room, but I want answers today. This family's falling apart, and I won't have more theatrics. Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his cufflinks. No theatrics, Inspector, only truth. Tonight, in the library at 8, I shall reveal the murderer of Victor Langford. All will be clear, and the little gray cells will triumph. The day passed in a haze of whispered conversations and furtive glances. Gerald smoked incessantly, his hands trembling, while Violet clung to her mother, her eyes red from crying. Lady Eleanor maintained her composure, though her fingers betrayed her nerves, twisting a handkerchief into knots. The colonel paced, his military bluster reduced to a weary scowl, and Mrs. Fenton's chatter had dwindled to nervous murmurs. Dr. Baxter buried himself in a medical journal, his spectacles glinting, while Simmons, Annie, and Mrs. Potts moved through their duties with the quiet dread of those awaiting a verdict. Poirot spent the morning in private consultation with me in the conservatory, his voice low and precise. Hastings, the clues have spoken, the brass button, the burned affidavit. The woman's voice heard by Annie. The killer is clever, but their heart betrays them. Tonight, we lay bare the truth. I frowned, still grappling with the puzzle. Violet's confession threw me. Poirot, was she protecting Lady Eleanor? Or someone else? He tapped his cane thoughtfully. Violet's lie was born of love, not guilt. The Whodunit is the key. Its navy thread, its military style, its placement. It was meant to mislead, yet it points directly to the killer. At 8 o'clock, the household assembled in the library, the scene of the crime now a stage for Poirot's denouement. The fire crackled, casting shadows on the oak shelves, and the chairs were ranged in a semicircle before the desk. Hargreaves stood by the door, notebook in hand, while I positioned myself near Poirot, my heart pounding with anticipation. Poirot stood before the group, his posture erect, his voice clear and commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, the murder of Victor Langford was a crime of precision and desperation, woven with lies to obscure the truth. But Poirot, he sees through the deception. Let us reconstruct the crime, step by step, and unmask the guilty. He paced slowly, his cane tapping the floor. On the morning of the murder, Monsieur Langford enters this library at 6:30. Seen by Annie. He is agitated, writing a letter to the colonel. Dear Reginald, I must insist on full disclosure regarding the Cairo AFF and affidavit we now know, proving fraud in their Egyptian trade. Langford intended to confront the colonel, or perhaps to expose him. The colonel shifted, his face darkening, but Poirot continued. Between 7 and 8, the killer enters. Langford trusts them no struggle, no cry. The letter opener, taken from this desk, is plunged into his heart with surgical precision. A button brass, military, with navy thread is found here. He pointed to the floor, and in the fireplace, ash and wax from a burned document, the affidavit, destroyed, to hide its secrets. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. The alibis are flimsy. The colonel in his study, Lady Eleanor in her room, Gerald asleep. Violet in the garden, Dr. Baxter writing, Mrs. Fenton dressing, the servants in their duties. But one person lied, and the clues betray them. He turned to Annie, who stood trembling at the back. Mademoiselle Annie, you heard a woman's voice arguing with Langford. You protected her, out of loyalty. Annie's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. Yes, sir. I didn't want to say, but it was Lady Eleanor. I heard her through the door, just before 7. A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor rose, her face pale, but defiant. This is preposterous. I was in my room, as I've said. Poirot raised a hand. Madam, your coat navy with silver buttons now. But before, it had brass buttons. One was torn off, left in the library to implicate another, perhaps Gerald, with his military background. The colonel roared, You're accusing my wife. Where's your proof? Poirot produced the brass button, holding it aloft. This button, its navy thread matching your coat's fabric, was torn in haste. You replaced it with silver, thinking, to cover your tracks. But Annie, she mended your coat, and her fear betrayed you. Lady Eleanor's composure cracked, her voice trembling. I didn't kill him. Yes, I was in the library. I begged Victor to stop his accusations he was going to ruin us, expose forged documents that would bankrupt Reginald. But I left him alive. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Non, madam. You argued, and in a moment of desperation, you seized the letter opener. The blow was precise. You knew the heart's location, perhaps from Dr. Baxter's medical talk at dinner. You burned the affidavit to protect your husband, but a fragment remained, and the button you left it to point to Gerald, to deflect suspicion. Violet sobbed, clutching her mother. No, it can't be true. The colonel stepped forward, his voice breaking. Eleanor, tell me it's not so. Lady Eleanor sank into her chair, her face ashen. I couldn't let him destroy us. The business, our home, everything we built. He laughed at me, said he'd expose Reginald's dealings. I didn't mean to kill him. It was a moment of madness. Hargreaves moved swiftly, signaling. A constable. Lady Eleanor Ashby, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Langford. The room dissolved into chaos. Violet's cries, the colonel's anguished protests, Gerald's stunned silence. Poirot remained calm, his work complete, as Lady Eleanor was led away. Her head bowed. He turned to me. Hastings, the hearted, betrays. She killed to protect her family. But the button, it spoke the truth. Hargreaves, grudgingly impressed, shook Poirot's hand. You've done it, Mr. Poirot. I was wrong about Gerald. Poirot inclined his head. The little gray cells, Inspector, they see what the eye misses. As the household dispersed, shaken to its core, Poirot and I stepped onto the terrace. The night air cool against our faces. A tragic affair. Hastings, he said softly. Love and loyalty, twisted into murder. The button, it was her undoing. I nodded, still reeling from the revelation. Lady Eleanor, so poised, so protective, had been the killer all along. The web of deceit had unraveled, and Poirot's logic had prevailed. Chapter 11. The reflection the aftermath of Lady Eleanor's arrest cast a heavy pall over Elmwood Hall, as if the very walls mourned the shattering of its tranquil facade. The morning of the 8th day broke with a feeble sun struggling through clouds, its light doing little to lift the gloom that clung to the household. The library, once a place of quiet study, now stood as a silent witness to the tragedy. Its door closed, but its memories inescapable. Hercule Poirot, ever the observer of human nature, seemed untouched by the melancholy. His demeanor as precise and composed as ever as he joined me for a late breakfast. In the dining room, the table was sparsely attended. The colonel, his face etched with grief and disbelief, sat silently, staring into his coffee. Violet, her eyes red and swollen, picked at her food, her fragile frame trembling with the weight of her mother's confession. Gerald was absent, reportedly sequestered in his room, grappling with the revelation that his mother had killed to protect the family. Mrs. Fenton, for once subdued, murmured condolences to no one in particular, while Dr. Baxter excused himself early, citing a need to attend to village patients. The servant Simmons, Annie, and Mrs. Potts moved with hushed efficiency, their faces drawn. Poirot, sipping his tisane, surveyed the scene with his characteristic detachment, though his green eyes held a glimmer of compassion. "Hastings," he said softly, as we retired to the conservatory for a private word, "the case is solved, but the heart it weeps. The tragedy of Elmwood Hall is not only the death of Monsieur Langford, but the destruction of a family." I nodded, still reeling from the previous night's denouement. I never suspected Lady Eleanor. Poirot, she seemed so controlled, so protective. To think she killed to shield the colonel's reputation, it's heartbreaking. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, his voice measured. The human heart, mon ami, it is a labyrinth. Lady Eleanor acted out of love and fear, love for her family, fear of ruin. The affidavit, it threatened to expose the colonel's fraud in the Cairo trade, a scandal that would have stripped them of their home, their status. She struck in a moment of desperation, but the button betrayed her. I frowned, recalling the small brass clue. That button, Poirot, how did you know it was hers? The coat had silver buttons when we saw it. He smiled faintly, tapping his temple. The little gray cells, Hastings, the buttons navy thread matched. Her coat's fabric, and Annie's fear when questioned about her sewing kit spoke volumes. Lady Eleanor replaced the brass buttons with silver after the murder, hoping to erase the evidence. But the thread, it lingered, and Annie's loyalty could not hide the truth forever. We sat in silence for a moment, the conservatory's glass walls framing the windswept garden beyond. The roses, once vibrant, now drooped under the weight of recent rains, a fitting metaphor for the household state. I ventured, "What about Gerald?" Hargreaves was so certain he was the killer. Poirot chuckled softly. "The inspector, he sees only the surface debts, tempers, no alibi. Gerald was a convenient scapegoat, his military background aligning with the button style. But the blow to Langford's heart was too precise, too calculated for an impulsive act, and Violet's false confession. It was a noble attempt to protect her mother, born of love, not guilt." I shook my head, marveling at his insight. "And the affidavit, was it really about the colonel's fraud?" Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "The telegram from my London contact confirmed Langford's suspicions of forged documents in the Egyptian trade. He intended to confront the colonel, perhaps to blackmail him or clear his own name. Lady Eleanor, overhearing their arguments, feared the consequences. She burned the affidavit, but the wax seal and the word affidavit remained, a ghost of her crime. The day unfolded quietly. the household in limbo as Hargreaves finalized his report. Lady Eleanor had been taken to the local police station. Her arrest a formal affair conducted with as much dignity as the circumstances allowed. The colonel, devastated, spent hours in his study, poring over the very ledgers that had sparked the fatal chain of events. Violet, accompanied by Mrs. Fenton, visited her mother briefly. Returning with tear-streaked cheeks, Poirot, true to his nature, took a final walk through the house, his cane tapping lightly as he revisited the library. I joined him, curious. Is there more to find, Poirot? The case is closed, isn't it? He paused by the fireplace, his gaze lingering on the now clean grate. Closed, yes, but the mind. It reflects every crime. Hastings, it teaches us something of humanity. Lady Eleanor, she was no villain, but a woman driven to extremes by love and fear. The button. It was her undoing, a small detail that spoke when she could not. He turned to me, his expression solemn. In my work, I seek order, method, the triumph of reason. But always, I am reminded that the hearted is the true mystery. We solve the crime, but the wounds, they remain. As evening approached, Poirot announced his departure, his work at Elmwood Hall complete. The household gathered in the hall to bid him farewell, their gratitude tempered by sorrow. The colonel shook his hand, his voice gruff. You've done USS service, Mr. Poirot, though it's cost us dearly. Thank you. Violet, her voice barely audible, added, You found the truth, sir. I only wish it hadn't been so painful. Poirot bowed, his manner gentle. Mademoiselle, the truth, it is a bitter medicine, but it heals. Take care of your family. Simmons, ever the dutiful butler, carried Poirot's valise to the waiting car, and I followed, my own bag packed. As we drove down the gravel drive, the great house receding behind us, I felt a pang of sadness for the Ashbys. Their lives forever altered by a single act of desperation. Poirot, I said, as the countryside rolled past, do you ever tire of this, uncovering secrets, tearing families apart? He gazed out the window, his face reflective. Never, Hastings. To bring order to chaos. To find truth in deception, it is my purpose. But I do not rejoice in the pain it causes. The little gray cells, they solve the puzzle, but the hearted understands the cost. The car carried us toward the station, and as Elmwood Hall vanished from view, I knew the case of the single button clue would linger in my memory, a testament to Poirot's genius, and to the fragile, flawed humanity he so masterfully unraveled. Chapter 12. The button and the truth. Drawing room at Greystone Manor was heavy with anticipation, the air thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish. The long windows, draped in heavy velvet, admitted only slivers of the late afternoon light, casting the room into a somber half-glow. The assembled company: Lady Beatrice Ashford, Clara Ashford, Dr. Harold Finch, Margaret Vale, Roger Pennington, and the nervous young maid. Ellen sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces taut with varying degrees of apprehension. Inspector Japp, standing by the fireplace, adjusted his tie and glanced at Miss Jane Marple, who sat serenely in an armchair near the center of the room, her knitting needles clicking softly. A faint smile playing on her lips. Miss Marple's eyes, sharp and bright despite her age, moved from one face to another, as if reading the secrets etched in their expressions. The single button, now resting on a small silver tray on the table before her, seemed to command the room's attention. It was a simple thing, brass, slightly tarnished, with a faint embossed pattern of a rose, but its presence was as weighty as a judge's gavel. Mesdames et messieurs, Miss Marple began, her voice soft but carrying the authority of one who had unraveled many a tangled thread. We are gathered here to bring clarity to the tragedy that has befallen Greystone Manor. The death of Sir Reginald Ashford was no accident, nor was it the work of a vengeful spirit, as some might have whispered. It was a murder, calculated and deliberate, and the key to its solution lies in this humble button. Clara Ashford, her face pale beneath her dark curls, leaned forward, her hands twisting in her lap. A button. Surely, Miss Marple, you cannot mean that such a trifle could solve a murder. Miss Marple's smile deepened, though her eyes remained steady. My dear Miss Ashford, it is often the smallest things that overlooked, the dismissed that reveal the truth. This button, found in the passage behind the library, tells a story of its own. But let us proceed with order and method. She paused, her needles pausing mid-stitch, and turned her gaze to Inspector Job. Inspector, you have been most diligent in your inquiries, and I commend you. But allow me to recount the events as I see them, piecing together the clues that have brought us to this moment. Job nodded, though his expression betrayed a flicker of impatience. Go on, Miss Marple. I'm all ears. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, the rhythmic click of the needles underscoring her words. Let us begin with the night of Sir Reginald's death at precisely 10:47 p.m., as confirmed by the stopped clock in the library. Shattered during the struggle, Sir Reginald was found with a single gunshot wound to the chest, the revolver his own lying beside him. The police, quite naturally, considered suicide, but the absence of powder burns on his hands and the angle of the wound suggested otherwise. A murder, then, committed in a locked room, with no apparent means of entry or exit save the window, which was latched from within. She glanced at Roger Pennington, whose jaw tightened. Mr. Pennington, you were quick to point out that the window could not have been opened without breaking the latch, a fact confirmed by the groundskeeper. Yet, the passage behind the library, accessible only through a concealed panel, provided another route one known to few, but not to none. Margaret Vale, her lips pursed, interjected, that passage is a family secret, Miss Marple. Only the Ashfords would know of it. Quite so, Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild. And yet, secrets have a way of escaping their confines, do they not? Ellen, the maid, mentioned dusting the passage only a week before, noting a footprint that did not belong to any of the family. A man's footprint, size 9, with a distinctive scuff on the heel. Curious, is it not? Ellen, seated at the edge of the group, flushed and looked down at her hands. Miss Marple continued, undeterred. But let us return to the button. It was found in the passage, near the concealed panel, and it does not belong to any garment in Sir Reginald's wardrobe, nor to those of the household staff. I took the liberty of examining the coats in the hall closet, and I found that this button matches precisely those on Dr. Finch's overcoat, a coat he claimed to have left in his motor car. On the night of the murder, Dr. Finch's face darkened, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. This is preposterous. I was in the guest room, as I told you, attending to a patient in the village until after 10. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Indeed, Doctor, your alibi is strong, supported by Mrs. Vale's testimony that she saw you return at 10:30 p.m., but alibis, like buttons, can be misleading. You see, the button was not merely dropped, it was torn, suggesting a struggle or haste, and the passage, though dusty, bore traces of recent disturbance, including a faint smear of blood that matched Sir Reginald's type. Lady Beatrice, her voice trembling, spoke up. But why would anyone wish to harm my husband? He was a good man, despite his sternness. Miss Marple's expression softened, though her tone remained firm. Sir Reginald was a man of many enemies, Lady Beatrice, as wealth and power often attract. But the motive, I believe, lies closer to home. A matter of betrayal, perhaps, or a secret long buried. Let us consider the financial records, which Mr. Pennington so kindly provided. They revealed that Sir Reginald had recently altered his will, cutting out a significant beneficiary in favor of another, a decision that, I suspect, was not taken lightly. Clara's eyes widened, and she glanced at her mother, who remained still, her face unreadable. Miss Marple pressed on. And then there is the matter of the revolver. It was Sir Reginald's, yes, but it was kept in a locked case in the study. Only 2 keys existed, one in Sir Reginald's possession, and the other in the hands of someone trusted. The room fell silent, save for the soft crackle of the fire. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her hands folding neatly in her lap. I propose a small experiment, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Inspector Japp, would you be so kind as to ask each person here to produce their coat? I believe we shall find the missing button or the lack thereof most illuminating. Japp, though skeptical, complied, directing the butler to fetch the coats. One by one, they were brought forward, and Dr. Finch's overcoat was the last. As Miss Marple had predicted, one button was missing from the cuff, the threads frayed in a manner identical to the button on the tray. Dr. Finch rose, his voice sharp. This proves nothing. Anyone could have taken my coat, used it to frame me. Miss Marple nodded, as if considering the possibility. Indeed, doctor. But the footprint, the blood, and the button form a pattern that points to one who knew the passage, had access to the revolver, and harbored a motive strong enough to kill. I believe, mesdames et messieurs, that we are close to the truth. But to be certain, we must revisit one final detail: the timing of the shot. She turned to Ellen, her gaze gentle but piercing. Ellen, you told me you heard the shot at 10:47 p.m., yet you were in the kitchen, far from the library. How, then, did you hear it so clearly? Ellen's hands trembled, and she stammered. I was passing by the library, ma'am. I didn't want to say, for fear of being scolded. Miss Marple's smile was almost maternal. Of course, my dear. But the truth, like a button, cannot remain hidden forever. Tomorrow, we shall gather again, and I shall reveal the full story of Sir Reginald's murder. Until then, I suggest you all reflect on the weight of a single, simple clue. As the group dispersed, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind already piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The button had spoken, but the truth was yet to be fully unveiled. Chapter 13. The tense morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Greystone Manor's drawing room, casting long, golden streaks across the polished floor. The atmosphere was one of strained anticipation, as if the very walls held their breath. The same group from the previous evening: Lady Beatrice Ashford, Clara Ashford, Dr. Harold Finch, Margaret Vale, Roger Pennington, and Ellen the maid had reconvened. Their chairs arranged in the same semicircle, though now their postures betrayed a restless unease. Inspector Japp stood near the door, his notebook in hand, his eyes darting between the suspects and Miss Jane Marple, who sat composed as ever, her knitting resting in her lap like a silent partner. In her deductions, Miss Marple's gaze, keen and unyielding, swept over the assembly. The silver tray with the single brass button still sat on the table before her, its rose pattern catching the light. She folded her hands, her voice cutting through the heavy silence with the precision of a well-aimed dart. Mesdames et messieurs, she began, her tone calm but laced with an undercurrent of finality. Yesterday, we established that this button, torn from Dr. Finch's overcoat, was found in the secret passage behind the library, a passage used by the murderer to enter and exit the scene of Sir Reginald Ashford's death. But a button alone does not a murderer make. We must now consider the tapestry of motives, opportunities, and contradictions that have woven this crime together. Clara Ashford, her face drawn, spoke up, her voice trembling. Miss Marple, surely you don't believe Dr. Finch capable of such a thing. He's been our family physician for years. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her expression remained resolute. My dear Miss Ashford, loyalty is a fine quality, but it must not blind us to the truth. Let us revisit the events of that fateful night with the clarity of order and method. She leaned forward slightly, her fingers brushing the button as if to draw inspiration from its mute testimony. Sir Reginald was shot at 10:47 p.m., as confirmed by the stopped clock in the library. The revolver, his own, was taken from a locked case in the study, accessible only by two keys, one in Sir Reginald's possession and the other kept by Lady Beatrice. Yet, the key was found in the study, undisturbed, suggesting the murderer had access to Sir Reginald's personal effects. Lady Beatrice, her hands clasped tightly, interjected, "But I never touched the key. It was always in the drawer, as Reginald preferred." "Precisely," Miss Marple said, nodding. "Which leads us to consider who might have known of its location. The passage, too, was a family secret, yet Ellen's testimony revealed a footprint a man's, size 9, with a scuffed heel. Dr. Finch, I note that your boots match this description, and the button from your coat was found nearby. But let us not rush to conclusions." Dr. Finch, his face flushed with indignation, rose from his chair. "This is outrageous. I've told you. I was in the village until 10:30 p.m., attending to Mrs. Carter. Margaret saw me return." Margaret Vale nodded vigorously, her eyes wide. "Yes, I saw him come in through the front door, just as I was retiring for the night." Miss Marple's smile was almost imperceptible. "Indeed, Mrs. Vale, your testimony is most helpful. But let us consider the timing. The village is a mere 10 minutes' drive from Greystone Manor, yet you, Dr. Finch, claimed to have returned at 10:30 p.m., leaving a gap of 17 minutes before the shot was fired. Enough time, perhaps, to slip into the passage, retrieve the revolver, and confront Sir Reginald." The room grew still, the weight of her words settling over the group. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady. "But motive, Ms. Amos, is the heart of the matter. Sir Reginald's will, recently altered, cut out a significant beneficiary, Dr. Finch, who stood to lose a substantial inheritance promised to him for his years of service. A promise, I suspect, that Sir Reginald had no intention of keeping, given his discovery of certain indiscretions." Dr. Finch's face paled, his hands clenching. "Indiscretions? What are you implying, Miss Marple?" She raised a hand, her gesture calming but firm. "Patience, doctor. Let us also consider Mr. Pennington, whose financial records revealed Sir Reginald's intent to sell off a portion of the estate, a decision that would have ruined Mr. Pennington's plans for a lucrative development deal. And then there is Miss Clara, whose engagement to a young man of whom her father disapproved was a source of great tension." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. Miss Marple's gaze softened as she turned to Ellen, who sat at the edge of the group, her hands twisting nervously. "And you, Ellen, have been most forthcoming, yet I sense there is more you have not told us. You heard the shot at 10:47 p.m., yet you were not in the kitchen, as you first claimed, but near the library. Why?" Ellen's voice was barely a whisper. I was delivering a tray to the study, ma'am. I heard the shot and ran back to the kitchen. I was frightened." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And in your haste, Did you see anyone near the library or the passage? Ellen hesitated, her gaze flickering to Dr. Finch before dropping to her lap. No, ma'am. No one. The room seemed to hold its breath as Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting needles resuming their quiet rhythm. The truth, Ms. Amos, is like a skein of wool tangled at first, but with care, it can be unraveled. The button, the footprint, the key, and the timing all point to a plan executed with precision. But there is one final piece of contradiction in the alibis that cannot be ignored. She turned to Inspector Japp, who had been listening intently. Inspector, would you be so kind as to check the guest room clock? I believe it was set forward by 10 minutes, a small but deliberate act to create an alibi. Japp's eyes widened, but he nodded and left the room, returning moments later with a grim expression. You're right, Miss Marple. The clock in the guest room is 10 minutes fast. A murmur rippled through the group, and Dr. Finch's face drained of color. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but unyielding. Dr. Finch, you returned earlier than you claimed. Did you not? You used the passage, retrieved the revolver, and confronted Sir Reginald, knowing his decision to alter the will would leave you with nothing. The button was torn in your haste, and the clock was your attempt to secure an alibi. Dr. Finch opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The room was silent, save for the soft click of Miss Marple's needles. Tomorrow, she said, her voice steady, we shall gather one final time, and I shall lay bare the full truth of Sir Reginald's murder. Until then, I urge you all to reflect on the consequences of deceit. As the group dispersed, their faces a mixture of shock and dread, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind already preparing for the final act of this intricate drama. The net was tightening, and the truth was within her grasp. Chapter 14. The final gathering. The grand dining hall of Greystone Manor was an imposing space, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork, and its long mahogany table set for a gathering that felt more like a tribunal than a meal. The chandeliers above cast a soft, flickering light, illuminating the faces of the assembled company. Lady Beatrice Ashford, Clara Ashford, Dr. Harold Finch, Margaret Vale, Roger Pennington, and Ellen the maid each sat rigidly, their eyes darting between one another and the diminutive figure of Miss Jane Marple, who occupied the head of the table. Her knitting lay neatly folded beside her, replaced by a small notebook and the now infamous brass button, which gleamed on its silver tray like an accusatory eye. Inspector Japp stood by the door, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of skepticism and anticipation. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, which marked the hour as for in the afternoon. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, as if urging the truth to emerge. Miss Marple's voice, when she spoke, was as clear and precise as a bell. Mesdames et messieurs, we have reached the moment of truth. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashford has cast a shadow over this house. But today, that shadow shall be lifted. The clues, the button, the footprint, the key, the clock have all pointed us toward the solution. But it is the human heart, with its motives and deceptions, that reveals the full picture. She paused, her sharp eyes scanning the room. Lady Beatrice sat with her hands folded, her face a mask of stoic dignity. Clara's eyes were red-rimmed, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Dr. Finch, pale and tense, stared at the button as if it might speak. Margaret Vale's lips were pressed into a thin line, while Roger Pennington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ellen, at the far end, seemed to shrink into herself, her gaze fixed on the floor. Let us reconstruct the night of the murder, Miss Marple continued, her tone measured. At 10:47 p.m., Sir Reginald was shot in the library with his own Revolver taken from a locked case in the study. The window was latched, the door locked. But the secret passage behind the library provided access. A button, torn from Dr. Finch's overcoat, was found in that passage, along with a man's footprint. Size 9, with a scuffed heel. The guest room clock, set forward by 10 minutes, provided a false alibi. These facts, Ms. Amos, are undeniable. Dr. Finch's voice broke the silence, sharp and defensive. I've told you, Miss Marple, that button could have been planted. Anyone could have taken my coat. Miss Marple's smile was gentle but unyielding. Indeed, Doctor, that is a possibility. But let us consider the motive. Sir Reginald's decision to alter his will, cutting you out of a promised inheritance, was a blow. Was it not? Your years of service to the family, your hopes for financial security, all dashed by a man who discovered your secret dealings with a rival estate owner. The room gasped, and Dr. Finch's face turned ashen. That's a lie, he stammered. But his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple raised a hand, her gesture silencing him. But you were not alone in your motives. Mr. Pennington, your plans for the estate's development were threatened by Sir Reginald's decision to sell. Miss Clara, your father's disapproval of your suitor created a rift that pained you deeply. And Lady Beatrice, the weight of a marriage strained by secrets cannot be overlooked. Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed, but she remained silent. Miss Marple turned to Ellen, her voice softening. And you, Ellen, have been most reticent. You claimed to hear the shot while passing the library, yet your duties rarely took you there at that hour. I believe you saw something or someone that night. Ellen's hands trembled, and a tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't mean to lie, ma'am, she whispered. I saw Dr. Finch coming out of the study just before the shot. He was carrying something, but I couldn't see what. I was scared, so I ran. A murmur rippled through the room, and Dr. Finch leapt to his feet. This is absurd. The girl's mistaken. I was in the village. Miss Marple's gaze remained steady. The village, yes, but you returned earlier than you claimed, Doctor. The clock in the guest room, set forward by 10 minutes, was a clever touch, but it could not hide the truth. You entered the passage, retrieved the revolver using the key you knew Lady Beatrice kept in the study drawer, and confronted Sir Reginald. The button was torn in your haste, and the footprint betrayed your presence. But there is one final detail: the blood. She paused, letting the word hang in the air. A small smear of blood was found in the passage, matching Sir Reginald's type. It was not from the wound, which did not bleed externally, but from a scratch on his hand, sustained during a struggle. Your coat, Dr. Finch, bore a faint trace of blood on the cuff, overlooked in your haste to clean it. Dr. Finch sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping. The room was silent, save for Clara's stifled sob. Miss Marple's voice softened, almost regretful. You killed Sir Reginald, Dr. Finch, driven by the fear of losing everything. You used the passage to avoid detection, but the button, the footprint, and Ellen's testimony have betrayed you. Inspector Japp stepped forward, his voice gruff. Dr. Finch, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Ashford. As Japp led Dr. Finch from the room, the others sat in stunned silence. Miss Marple rose, her notebook in hand, and addressed the group one final time. The truth, Ms. Amos, is often painful, but it restores order. I shall take my leave now, but I urge you to find peace in the clarity we have achieved. She turned to leave, pausing at the door to glance at the button on the tray. Such a small thing, she murmured, yet it held the key to justice. The dining hall emptied slowly, the weight of the revelation lingering like a shadow. Miss Marple stepped into the hall, her mind already turning to the quiet reflections that would follow. Chapter 15. The quiet departure of the late afternoon sun bathed the grounds of Greystone Manor in a golden glow, softening the stark lines of the ancient stone walls and lending an air of tranquility to the estate that had, only hours before, been a stage for revelation and reckoning. Miss Jane Marple stood in the gravel drive, her small suitcase at her feet, her wear-upon shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. The wind carried the faint scent of autumn leaves, and the distant call of a thrush echoed across the lawn. Behind her, the manor loomed, its windows reflecting the fading light, as if guarding the secrets it had finally relinquished. Inspector Japp emerged from the front door, his hat in hand, his expression a mixture of admiration and bemusement. "Miss Marple," he said, approaching her, "I'll admit, I had my doubts, but you've done it again. That button business well. It's the sort of thing that makes a man question his own methods." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though. Her smile was modest. "You are too kind, Inspector. But it is not the button alone that solved the case. It is the human heart, its passions, its fears, its contradictions that reveals the truth. The button was merely a thread, and I followed it to its source." Japp nodded, scratching his chin. "Dr. Finch is in custody, and he's confessed. Said he acted in a moment of desperation. Thought Sir Reginald's new will would leave him penniless. Seems he'd been skimming funds from the estate for years, and Sir Reginald had just found out." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, a man driven by fear can do terrible things. But it is curious, is it not, how often greed and pride masquerade as necessity. Dr. Finch believed he was owed something, and that belief led him to murder." She paused, her gaze drifting to the manor, where Clara Ashford stood at a window, her silhouette framed against the glass. "Poor Miss Clara," Miss Marple murmured. "She will carry the weight of this tragedy, but I believe she has the strength to heal. And Lady Beatrice, too, will find her way, though the path will be difficult." Japp followed her gaze, his voice softening. "You've got a way of seeing people, Miss Marple. Not just the crime, but the why of it all. Makes me think there's more to this detective business than evidence and alibis." Miss Marple's smile deepened, and she adjusted her shawl. "The evidence and alibis are important, Inspector, but they are only the surface. Beneath lies the truth of human nature, its flaws, its hopes, its secrets. In my village, I have seen such things in the smallest gestures, a glance, a hesitation, a button misplaced. They are the same everywhere, even in a grand place like Greystone Manor." A motor car rumbled up the drive, its driver tipping his cap. As he stepped out to collect Miss Marple's suitcase, she turned to Japp, her voice gentle but firm. "You will keep an eye on Ellen, won't you? She is young, and her fear kept her silent too long. A kind word now, and then will do her good." Japp chuckled, shaking his head. "You're a marvel, Miss Marple. I'll see to it. And what about you? Off to another mystery, I suppose?" Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief. "Oh, I shall return to St. Mary Mead, where the mysteries are smaller but no less intriguing. A cup of tea, a quiet evening by the fire, and perhaps a new skein of wool to untangle. That is quite enough for me." She stepped toward the motor car, pausing to glance back at the manor one final time. The weight of the case seemed to linger in the air, but Miss Marple's heart was light, her work complete. "Goodbye, Inspector," she said, her voice carrying the warmth of a friend. "Do take care, and remember never overlook the small things." As the car pulled away, Japp watched her go, a wry smile on his face. The manor stood silent behind him, its secrets laid bare, its order restored. And in the distance, Miss Marple's figure grew smaller, a quiet, unassuming woman who had, with a single button and her little gray cells, brought justice to Greystone Manor. The thrush called again, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate into twilight. Life, Miss Marple knew, would go on as it always did, with new stories waiting to be unraveled.